When my son pushed away the plastic plate and said, "Real family doesn't serve lies on fancy dishes," the entire table froze, including my mother-in-law. No one expected a 10-year-old to say that, but he did. And honestly, I've never been prouder. I'm Alara Brooks. I'm 33 years old, a graphic designer, a wife, and a mom to the most intuitive, thoughtful little boy I know, Mason. He's 10 now, and somehow already wiser than most adults I've met. He was the only child I brought into my marriage with Daniel, my husband. And even though Daniel's never made Mason feel like anything less than his own son, not everyone in his family got the memo, especially Sylvia. Sylvia Brooks, my mother-in-law, is the kind of woman who hosts 5-course dinners just to show off her bone china collection and monogrammed napkins. She's sharp, calculated, the kind of person who offers you a compliment that feels more like a riddle you failed to solve. And from day one, I could tell she saw Mason as an outsider. You know the kind of person who smiles at your kid but never really looks at them? That was Sylvia. Always polite, always cold. When Daniel and I got married, Mason was 5. He called Daniel Dad on his own by the time he was 6. I thought, maybe this is working. We were building something stable, something real. But there were cracks, small things at first. Sylvia would give all the grandkids matching Christmas pajamas, except Mason. She'd introduce her other grandchildren as her babies and refer to Mason as Alara's little one. Once she even corrected him when he called Daniel Dad. She said, "Let's not confuse things, sweetheart." I kept quiet for years. I swallowed it all. The awkward pauses, the quiet exclusions, the subtle digs masked as tradition. I wanted to believe it wasn't intentional. That if I just smiled enough, showed up enough, proved myself enough, she'd let Mason in. But that Sunday dinner changed everything. It was supposed to be a family celebration. Sylvia invited everyone. Daniel's siblings, their kids, even his cousin who lives 2 states away, and us, of course. I had a weird feeling the moment we pulled into the driveway. Mason held my hand a little tighter than usual. He asked, "Do you think Grandma will like my new shirt?" I smiled and said, "She'll love it." I lied. When we stepped inside, everything looked perfect. Her dining room was always straight out of a Southern Living magazine. The table was immaculate. Gold-rimmed plates, folded cloth napkins, crystal glasses. And then Mason's seat. His plate was plastic, bright blue, cartoon fish. It looked like it belonged in a daycare, not at a formal dinner table. My heart sank. I felt Mason's hand pull away from mine as he stood there, confused. His smile faded. I looked around. No one said a word, not even Daniel. Just shifting eyes, awkward glances, and forced small talk. I turned to Sylvia and asked, "Is there a reason Mason's plate is different?" She gave me that icy smile and said, "Real family gets china, Alara. It's tradition." And I froze. I've replayed that moment 100 times since. The words, the tone, the silence that followed. I didn't even know what to say. I was angry, embarrassed, humiliated, and worst of all, I saw Mason trying to shrink himself, but then he did something I'll never forget. Without a word, he pushed the plate away from him, gently, firmly, and looked her straight in the eye. "Real family doesn't serve lies on fancy dishes," he said, 10 years old, calm, clear, no tears, no tantrum, just truth. The table went dead quiet. No one breathed. Sylvia blinked. Daniel stared, and I was stunned, heart pounding, my jaw barely held shut. That was the moment everything changed. And if you think the room was quiet then, just wait until you hear what happened next. Before that dinner, before the plastic plate and the silence that followed, life in the Brooks family was always complicated. Polite on the surface, unsettling underneath. And I guess I always knew something was off. I just didn't want to admit how deep it ran. I married Daniel 5 years ago. He's kind, reliable, a little conflict-averse, but a good man. We met at a 4th of July barbecue through mutual friends. He was charming, funny, and most importantly, gentle. After my last relationship, I needed gentle. I had Mason from that previous chapter in my life, and Daniel didn't blink twice when he met my son. From the beginning, Daniel treated Mason like his own. He showed up for the big things, first school play, little league games, but also for the quiet things, bedtime stories, brushing teeth, teaching him how to tie a tie. Mason adored him, still does. One night, completely unprompted, he started calling Daniel Dad. And Daniel just smiled and said, "I'd be honored." It meant everything to me. But I could tell not everyone felt the same way. Sylvia, Daniel's mother, is sharp. The kind of woman who remembers everyone's birthday, but weaponizes it. She's the unofficial queen of the family, makes all the plans, hosts every holiday, and expects absolute reverence in return. And from the moment I met her, I felt like I was auditioning for a role I was never going to get. When Daniel introduced me to his family, Sylvia greeted me with a tight-lipped smile and said, "Oh, you're the one with the little boy. Not Alara, not nice to meet you, just the one with the little boy." Still, I tried. God, I tried. I baked pies for Thanksgiving. I showed up early to help with setup. I bought gifts that matched her aesthetic, neutral, tasteful, never too flashy. I thought if I just proved myself enough, she'd soften. She didn't. At family events, she'd pass Mason by like he was a coat on the back of a chair. Not cruel, but calculated. She'd introduce her other grandchildren. My Ethan, my Lila, my little Maddie. And when it came to Mason, it was always, "And this is Alara's son." No warmth, no ownership. Just that distancing tone that said, "He's not one of us." I asked Daniel about it once, in private, after Christmas dinner. "Do you notice how your mom treats Mason?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "Yeah, I do. I think she needs time." Time. I gave her years. Mason, for his part, always tried to be kind. He's not a rowdy kid. He's sensitive, observant, feels energy before he hears words. Once, when he was 7, he came to me after one of Sylvia's dinners and asked, "Mom, did I do something wrong? Grandma doesn't look at me like she looks at the other kids." That broke me. But I didn't want him to carry my bitterness. I kept telling him, "Sometimes grown-ups have old ideas that take longer to change. It's not about you." I wanted to believe that, I really did. The truth, I had started tiptoeing around Sylvia's feelings more than I was protecting my son's. There were moments I'd catch myself hesitating before RSVPing to one of her events, wondering if Mason would be treated like a guest or a stain. And yet, I always went. Because that's what good wives do, right? Keep the peace. Keep smiling. But the older Mason got, the less I could lie to him, or to myself. I started noticing how he'd retreat when we were there, sitting quieter, shrinking smaller, and each time, a little part of me hated myself for letting it happen. By the time that Sunday dinner rolled around, I was already walking on cracked glass. I felt the weight of every little slight Sylvia had made over the years. Every time Daniel had looked away instead of speaking up, every time I'd told Mason, "Just smile and be polite." I thought it would be a normal dinner, maybe cold, maybe tense, but manageable. I didn't know it would be the night everything snapped. I didn't know my son was going to say what I hadn't had the courage to. And I definitely didn't know it would be the beginning of a shift that would change the way I saw my marriage, my voice, and my family. But now, looking back, I think that tension had been building for a long time. All it needed was a spark. And my son? He lit the match. The invitation came through a text message, not even a call. "Family dinner next Sunday, 6 p.m., everyone expected." No emojis, no pleasantries, just that sharp clipped tone Sylvia always used when she was trying to sound casual but in control. I showed it to Daniel, and he shrugged like it was nothing. "It's just her way," he said. I stared at the message, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. Every time she said family dinner, I had to remind myself that technically Mason and I counted. Technically. But we both knew it never really felt that way. That whole week, Mason kept asking questions. Should I wear my church shoes or my sneakers? Do you think Grandma will remember I don't eat ham? Can I sit next to you? He didn't ask those questions before Daniel and I got married. He never had to. But over the years, he'd learned to anticipate the unease, like he could feel it coming. And he was right. The day of the dinner, I made sure we all looked our best. I even had Mason help me pick out earrings. "You look pretty, Mom," he said as I fastened them in the mirror. Then he added, "Maybe Grandma will say something nice today." I smiled, but my stomach turned. We pulled up to Sylvia's house and everything looked perfect, like it always did. Her home was immaculate. from the manicured shrubs to the wreath on the door that matched the napkin rings inside. I used to admire her style. Now it felt like armor, polished, untouchable, cold. Inside, the dining table was set like something out of a magazine. White linens, gold flatware, crystal goblets. Every place setting was marked with a name card, elegantly handwritten. Ethan, Lila, Maddie, even Daniel. And then I saw it. One card simply said Alara. Another, slightly separate from the others, read Mason. Not in cursive, just printed block letters. No plate, no utensils. Just a bright blue plastic plate with cartoon fish and mismatched silverware from the kid's drawer. Mason blinked. "Is this my seat?" he asked quietly. I looked around. None of the other children had plastic plates, just Mason. I could feel my breath catch. My eyes found Daniel across the room. He saw it. He knew. And he did what he always did, looked away, pretended not to notice. I wanted to scream, to grab the plate and shatter it across the marble floor. But instead, I smiled that tight, fake smile I'd worn for far too long and said, "Sylvia, is there a reason Mason's plate is different?" She didn't even pause. Her voice was light, amused, like this was all a joke we were in on together. "Real family gets china, Alara. It's tradition." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sweet. Poisonous. I felt Mason shift next to me. He looked down at the plate, then back up at me. I crouched beside him and whispered, "It's okay, baby. We're okay." But we weren't. The room had gone quiet. Conversation had stopped. Even the cousins, mid-giggle and juice box swap, fell still. I stood there frozen, 100 thoughts racing through my mind. Do I call her out? Do I make a scene? Do I grab my son and leave? Would Daniel stop me? Would he even defend us? And then, just as I opened my mouth, Mason reached forward, calmly, slowly. He pushed the plate away, not with anger, not with drama, just quiet finality. Then he looked at Sylvia with the eyes of a boy who had learned too much, too young, and said, "Real family doesn't serve lies on fancy dishes." That was it. 9 words, spoken with the kind of calm that makes adults feel suddenly very small. The air changed. Sylvia's hand paused on her wine glass. Daniel went pale. Someone at the other end of the table gave a nervous cough. No one spoke. Mason didn't flinch. He didn't cry. He didn't even look to me for approval. He just knew what needed to be said. And he said it. I felt something inside me crack, not break, but open. All the years I'd spent trying to hold things together, to avoid drama, to keep peace at the expense of my dignity, it all came rushing back to me in that moment. I wasn't angry anymore. I was awake. And if you think Mason's words were bold, wait until you hear what happened when I finally stood up. Because after 10 years of biting my tongue, I was done being polite. For a second, I honestly thought no one had heard Mason. The silence was that deep, that heavy. He had said it so clearly, so calmly. Real family doesn't serve lies on fancy dishes. And yet no one responded. Not a word, not a breath. I looked down at my son, his small hands resting gently in his lap, back straight, eyes forward. He didn't look embarrassed or angry. He looked relieved, like a balloon that had finally been untied. And in that moment, I felt ashamed. Ashamed that my 10-year-old had more courage than I did. Ashamed that I had let this happen so many times before. Let him be excluded, talked over, handed secondhand affection, while I smiled and pretended everything was fine. I had protected everyone else's comfort at the cost of my son's dignity. Not anymore. I reached for my napkin and placed it gently on the table. That tiny motion made Sylvia blink, like she was just starting to register that this might not go the way she thought it would. I stood slowly, not to shout or cause a scene, but because standing up felt necessary, important, right. "No," I said. My voice came out stronger than I expected. Number kids don't say the funniest things, Sylvia. They say the truest ones, and if a child can see what's wrong here, then maybe it's time the rest of us stop pretending not to. Her mouth opened slightly as if she had something to say, but no sound came out. She looked around the table, maybe expecting someone to jump to her defense. No one did. I turned to Daniel. He was frozen in his seat, face pale, lips tight. For years, I'd waited for him to speak up, hoped he would challenge the small cruelties, the quiet biases, and every time, he chose silence. chose not to start drama. So I spoke now. I've walked into this house for 5 years pretending this is normal, letting Mason be treated like a second-class guest. I told myself it was better to keep the peace. But you know what? Peace built on silence isn't peace. It's compliance. I saw Daniel's jaw tighten. He glanced at Mason, then at me. His eyes softened for the first time that night. Still, Sylvia tried to regain control. She sat straighter and said with a forced laugh, "Well, if you want to be dramatic about a plate—" I cut her off. "It's not about the plate. It's never been about the plate. It's about how you've made it crystal clear, pun intended, that my son doesn't belong, that I don't belong. And you know what? That's fine. You're allowed your opinions, but you don't get to humiliate my child and call it tradition." The table was still. You could hear the antique grandfather clock ticking from the hall. Somewhere in the kitchen, something beeped. Probably an oven timer no one was going to check. Then I heard movement, a chair sliding back. Daniel stood up. I turned to him, unsure of what he would do. Was he going to defend her? Walk away? Tell me to calm down like he had in the past? Instead, he walked around the table, picked up the plastic plate, and carried it into the kitchen. A loud clatter echoed as he dropped it into the sink. He came back, grabbed a china plate, and placed it in front of Mason. Carefully, deliberately. Then he said, "Mason is my son. And he is real family. And if anyone here has a problem with that, they can excuse themselves from the table." I couldn't breathe for a second. I didn't expect that from him. Not tonight. Not ever, really. But there he was, shoulders squared, eyes steady, standing between his mother and ours. Sylvia was stunned, speechless for the first time in probably her life. Mason looked at his new plate, then at Daniel. He whispered, "Thank you, Dad." That word, Dad, landed like a weight, not heavy but grounding. Daniel nodded, his voice low. "You never needed a plate to prove you belong here." And in that moment, I knew something had changed. Not everything, not forever, but something. For once my voice had been heard, my son's truth had been respected, and the person who needed to take a stand finally did. We sat back down, together, stronger. Sylvia didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. We all sat back down, but nothing about the dinner felt the same. Mason's new plate, the china one, the one with gold trim and delicate floral edges, sat in front of him like a quiet crown. He didn't touch his food right away. He just looked around the table, watching everyone like he was waiting to see what would happen next, like he knew this wasn't just about him anymore. It was bigger. Daniel sat beside him, his hand lightly resting on Mason's back. His whole posture had changed. No more shrinking, no more pretending not to notice. He was present, and that alone was monumental. Sylvia. Sylvia sat at the head of the table, stiff as the linen napkins she had ironed to perfection. Her expression was unreadable. Tight lips, flaring nostrils, jaw clenched just enough to betray how rattled she truly was. She reached for her wine glass with the kind of grace she used when she wanted to remind everyone she was still in control. "Well," she said finally, her voice smooth but sharp. That was quite the outburst. I felt something inside me rise again, but Daniel beat me to it. "It wasn't an outburst," he said. "It was truth, and it was long overdue." She set the glass down a little too hard. "I've never treated Mason badly. You're all being dramatic over a plate. That plate. That damned plate. No," I said quietly, "you've treated him like an outsider from the beginning. The plate was just the first time you were bold enough to make it that obvious, but the energy has always been there. Every holiday, every visit, every polite smile." Daniel nodded. "Mom, you've never accepted Alara, not really, and I let it slide because I didn't want to choose between my wife and my family. But tonight, you made that choice for me." She flinched. "So what? I'm the villain now?" "No," I said gently. "You're a woman who's held on to a very narrow view of what family should look like. But Mason is just as much a Brooks as anyone at this table. He calls Daniel Dad. He lives in this family. He shows up, and he deserves to be shown the same respect." Sylvia looked like she was trying to keep her face from cracking. For a moment, I saw something behind her eyes, something like fear or loss. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said quietly. "I just I wanted to protect tradition. Daniel leaned forward. And in doing that, you've hurt the people you claim to care about. Silence followed, heavy, final. Then, from across the table, Daniel's sister, Claire, spoke up. I noticed, the way you treat Mason. We all did. We just didn't want to be the ones to say anything. Sylvia turned, stunned. Claire, he's a kid, Mom. A good one. He brings my girls little origami animals every time he sees them, and you treat him like he's made of glass and guilt. It's not okay. The cracks were spreading. Daniel's cousin Jason added, I've got 2 stepkids. I'd go to war for them. Blood doesn't make a family. Commitment does. Sylvia looked around the table. For once, no one was behind her. No one was saving her. It was just her, alone, sitting at the head of a table she'd once controlled like a queen, and now didn't recognize anymore. Mason finally picked up his fork. Is it okay if I eat now? He asked softly. I smiled and nodded. Of course, sweetheart. The tension didn't disappear, but it loosened, like the first breath after holding one in too long. Conversation resumed, awkward at first, then slowly settling into something more human. Not normal, something better. Sylvia barely spoke for the rest of the night. She didn't need to. The message had been delivered and heard. And me? I sat beside my son and my husband, hand in hand with both. I didn't feel like a guest anymore. I didn't feel like I had something to prove. For the first time in years, I felt equal. Not because Sylvia changed, but because I did. Because we did. Mason had cracked open the silence and the truth had poured out. Messy, loud, honest. And in that mess, we found something closer to real family than we'd ever had before. That dinner stayed with me, not just because of what was said, but because of what finally wasn't left unsaid. For years, I had trained myself to swallow discomfort, smooth over rough edges, and keep the peace. I'd tell myself, it's not worth the fight. The truth is, silence is its own kind of war. And that night, thanks to Mason, the silence was broken. For good. We drove home in near quiet, not an awkward silence, but the kind that follows something significant, something sacred. Mason sat in the back seat, humming to himself, a soft tune from some video game soundtrack he loved. Daniel reached for my hand on the center console, laced his fingers with mine. He didn't say anything right away. He just held my hand like he was holding something fragile, something real. I'm sorry, he said finally, his voice low, for every time I didn't speak up, for every time I let her make you or Mason feel small. I didn't say it's okay because it wasn't. Instead, I said, thank you for speaking up when it mattered most. And that was enough. That night, as I was tucking Mason into bed, he looked up at me with his big, tired eyes and asked, was I rude? I sat down on the edge of his bed, ran my fingers through his soft curls, and said, no, baby, you were brave. There's a difference. He nodded slowly, then whispered, it felt scary, but also good. I smiled. That's how you know it was the right thing. It took me until my 30s to find the courage to say what he said at 10. That breaks my heart, and heals it too, because he won't carry the same patterns. He's already unlearning the quiet compliance I took decades to recognize. In the days that followed, everything felt quieter. Not in a cold way, but like something had shifted. There were no follow-up texts from Sylvia, no forced apologies, no vague invitations to talk it out. She disappeared into her silence, which, honestly, was her choice. And I no longer felt the need to chase her down and fix what she refused to admit was broken. Daniel, though, changed, subtly, then more clearly. He started drawing firmer boundaries with his family. When Sylvia made a passive-aggressive comment in the group chat, he called it out. When family plans came up, he asked what we wanted to do, not just what his mother had decided. It wasn't about punishing anyone. It was about protecting our peace. A week later, Daniel sat Mason down and said, I'm proud of you for speaking up and for standing up for your place in this family, because you belong here, always. And Mason just smiled, like he knew, like he had known all along. I used to think keeping quiet was the noble thing, That being the bigger person meant letting things slide. But I've learned that being the bigger person doesn't mean being silent. It means speaking the truth, even when it shakes the room. Especially when it shakes the room. It means choosing your child's dignity over someone else's approval. It means redefining what family is. Because family isn't china plates or seating charts or genetics. Family is who shows up for you, who defends you when it counts, who listens, even when the truth is uncomfortable. That night, Mason gave all of us a gift. He spoke 9 simple words that ripped through years of pretenses and made space for something real. Real family doesn't serve lies on fancy dishes. I think about those words often now, not just as a clapback from a clever kid, but as a kind of wisdom, the kind that kids have before the world teaches them to be quiet. Before politeness replaces honesty, we don't go to every family event anymore. And when we do, we go on our terms. We bring our full selves. No more shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone. Sylvia still hasn't apologized. Maybe she never will. That's her journey. But ours? Ours is about showing up for each other, about raising a boy who knows his worth and being a woman who no longer apologizes for demanding respect. And honestly, I've never felt more like a real family. If this story touched something in you, if you've ever been the person trying to belong or the one protecting someone you love from quiet rejection, then I hope it reminded you of this. You have the right to speak up. You have the right to draw the line. And most of all, you have the right to protect your peace, no matter whose feelings get uncomfortable. Mason reminded me of that. And if a 10-year-old can be that brave, so can we. Thank you for listening to our story. Truly. If this resonated with you, please like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and let's talk in the comments. Have you ever been in a situation like this? I'd love to hear your experiences. And if you want more real stories about family, truth, and standing up for yourself, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you never miss a moment.